Hey everyone, I'm Troy Taylor, a strategic advisor with Acropolis Technology Group, and today I'll be talking with you about some two-factor authentication. So let me get looks like I've got a dialog box I need to get organized here. All right, great. So again, I'm Troy Taylor, and we'll be talking about two-factor authentication, or what may also be known as multi-factor authentication. So let me move on to a little bit about a definition between the two. So multi-factor authentication really is when there's more than two methods. Two-factor, as in the name, is simply two-factor authentication where there's only two. And from the origins, single-factor authentication, understandably, is where historically a user just has a password or something like that that they'll need to use to access a service or system or things like that. Then we add second factor authentication, and that's going to be something a user has. And this is where we're, in popular use is a key fob or access code or something like that, dynamic validation on a phone, something of that nature. Extending out to three-factor authentication, this is in many cases something a user is, and that can historically be retinal scan, fingerprint, and voice recognition. But really, those are rare instances where something that's used. So again, we'll just be factoring on two-factor authentication and the use in Office 365. So again, a little bit about the history, the thoughts on that. Multi-factor authentication has been with us for a little bit. I think back to maybe bank cards and other cards that had a physical card, and then the user had a PIN code that they would use to validate the request, whether it was logging into their ATM or building access code or something like that. But those systems have some challenges. So that's kind of the need for the evolution of something that's not quite as vulnerable as a static code that can be captured. So in a case where if someone happened to have the ability to reproduce access code or access card and knew the PIN code, then the system could be compromised. So we'll be talking about how the Microsoft Authenticator and modern solutions help resolve that. Again, modern uses for that, certainly social media, financial websites, popular email services, and things like that all take advantage of improvements and modernizations in two-factor authentication. The benefits, well, certainly improve security, and that's going to prevent the bad actors from compromising systems by making it, to the point where it's nearly impossible to compromise. Microsoft tells us that they find that 99.9% of the attempts to crack their systems are prevented by two-factor authentication. So that's a pretty powerful testament for the need or the benefits of having that. And then, again, the prevention features kind of twofold. First and foremost is the internal impact to an organization. User productivity, loss of data, systems impact, and things like that is the first and foremost is that. But then also, in the event that a system in an organization is compromised, then the challenge can be what's the external impacts to that? Having to tell a client that you can't deliver something because a system was compromised, or perhaps even worse than that is a condition where the client or customer starts to receive phishing attempts or other things that are generated because an organization's email systems or other systems were compromised, and suddenly what should be a valid email from a known sender is now a phishing attempt because of that. So certainly an important aspect is to prevent both internal as well as external impacts. Mitigates compromise as well. And I'll be talking a little bit about this, but two-factor authentication can really stop things from, if one system happens to be compromised, with multi-factor authentication protecting additional systems, then that will help prevent that from kind of expanding and carrying forth on that. So in reference to that is I want to talk quickly about something called being pwned or pawned, and that's really just geek speak for when you've been beaten or defeated. And towards that, there's a great website called Have I Been Pwned? And what you can see here is that you can use your email address, you can go out, check this, and you can find databases where your email address is included with the others that maybe have been compromised as well. So pretty important. Recommend everybody take a look at this, and if you find you're listed on there, consider changing your password. Also, I'll be talking here in a little bit about websites that allow two-factor authentication or provide that, and think about whether that's something you want to go ahead and do for that website as well. One of the thoughts too that you'll see on this is you may find that there's websites listed that you have no knowledge, no recollection of ever having registered for. And that's a condition where perhaps there was a site or service that you did log into and give a user ID and password, and then they may have had a relationship with somebody else, and for whatever reason, they shared their user database with someone else. And so then what can happen there is it can spill over, and suddenly your credentials are kind of splattered all over the internet. So again, take a look at this and see if you're listed. Almost certainly many websites have been compromised, and it's likely you'll find at least some instances where you were. Oh yeah, and again, that's first and foremost recommendation. Don't reuse passwords. But people are people, and it does happen. The world's kind of a complicated place, and sometimes in an effort to make things a little bit easier for ourselves, we might think that I might use my same email address and same password multiple times. But again, that can be a challenge, as I was describing. When one site gets compromised, then the bad actors are going to start using that information and start hunting around and find out where else you may have used that. So implementing two-factor authentication, using that wherever you can, again, will stop them from being able to take advantage of that and help you protect you when you from your logins and services and things like that. So I'm going to really focus on Office 365. Again, here's the link. Twofactorauth.org is a great website. It's a clearinghouse of all the popular sites, services, banks, everything like that have two-factor authentication already enabled. And I'm thinking that Facebook and some of the other sites and things like that, financial sites, they really are kind of upfront about recommending people do that during account setups and things like that. But there may be other sites that you weren't aware of. You think it's a good idea. It's not, looking through there and you find a site that you recognize as something you use, you see that it's available. This will have a guide again on how to go ahead and establish that. Another benefit is that you will actually have the ability, if you find somebody that's in there but doesn't have it, in some cases they'll list those as well. There's actually a way that you can kind of reach out to the organization and kind of give them a nudge and say you'd like to have them add that. So again, twofactorauth.org, recommend take a look at that. See if there's any sites that you feel you'd like to change how you're logging in. I'm going to focus on Office 365. Again, twofactorauth.org will show there's a large variety of sites that have this feature available, but really I think it's first and foremost for Acropolis that our focus is on how this can be leveraged to help protect Office 365 for our clients. I'll talk a little bit here about implementation and adoption. From the implementation standpoint, kind of a high-level overview for what the administrators will have to do, some requirements and some recommendations on that. But then also the adoption and the end-user experience are something I want to kind of more focus on that, because many times an organization will hold off on making a change because of the concern that it's going to have a negative impact on user productivity, or user experience or just general user happiness and things like that. Again, that's when things get so complicated, it kind of drives people to either rebel a little bit or try to circumnavigate them and things like that. That can be a reason why an organization might not have made the change to improve security. But again, I think I can demonstrate that adding the authentication app and setting this up are fairly straightforward, and so that should kind of allay some fears that what goes into it and what the user experience will be. Some recommendations. Acropolis is going to recommend that Azure Active Directory Premium P1 service is available within the Office 365 tenant. Then this is something that if you have an Office 365 subscription, if it doesn't include it, it can be added for individual users. And then many Office 365 subscriptions actually do include that. So that's something that can be looked at as far as during the design phase to see whether you have it or not. The real driver for this is a feature within this that is, this feature is called conditional access. And the benefits to that are the administrators can then define a couple of things. They can define a set of rules with working with the well, let me go back. I'll get back into the implementation here, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about Premium P1 and why we'll want to use it. The next thing I will recommend is that you have a modern Office software suite, 2016 or 2019, because part of what's going to happen is two-factor authentication with 365 is going to require modern authentication. So again, if you've got older applications and things like that that don't support that, those are things that can be corrected by using the subscription features within Office 365 to add those to your existing tenant. If you don't already have newer versions that are maybe perpetual licensed. So as far as the administration, again, they're going to make sure that modern authentication is enabled. Newer Office 365 tenants, it may be on by default. Anyone that's got an Office 365 for maybe a couple of years or older, it may not have been on by default, but they're going to need to make sure that it is in order to take advantage of how the authentication is going to work afterwards. The nutshell is that with modern authentication is kind of an identity management service that's available in Office 365, and it's the magic that allows the application to issue the challenge through the two-factor authentication method to the user to validate what's, that they're actually logging in. So they'll need to make sure that that's turned on. And then I spoke a little bit about conditional access. So this is where the administrators can go in and define a set of rules for when two-factor authentication is actually required. Two things kind of come to mind for me as far as, first and foremost, why that's a benefit. One is an organization may say, if there's conditions that users meet, and I don't think, we don't want them to need to have two-factor authentication, we want to go ahead and allow that. And that might be conditions where they're on a domain-joined, company-owned computer, and it's from the IP address, it can be told that it's from the main site. So if those conditions are true, administrators can say, okay, two-factor authentication is not going to be required for this particular log on. Anything outside of that, you're going to need to go ahead and use your two-factor authentication. Another benefit is during implementation or in other conditions where you may want to say, I only want a certain subset of users or services or applications to need this. And that's, again, with the administrators working with leadership can define, maybe a beta group or an implementation to make sure that things are going well before that's rolled out to the larger organization. Which, again, my point then is the administrators need to have available really appropriate user guides for the end user implementation, instructions and things like that. Again, this goes towards the adoption so that it can be shown that things are going to go well and smoothly, and that if there's a problem, the administrators are ready for how to address that with the end users and things like that. So a little preparation saves a pound of cure type scenario. User setup. So now let's talk about what happens with maybe again, the focus being on, my thought is that sometimes the organizations will hold off on making a change because there's a fear that it's going to be detrimental to productivity, or it's going to be too complex and the users are kind of revolt and things like that. But let's go ahead. We'll talk about selecting the verification method. We'll talk about the Microsoft Authenticator. There's in many things in IT, sometimes there's a variety of options, but really I'm going to focus on what Acropolis knows is really a solid solution, and that's using the Microsoft Authenticator. And then we're going to kind of step through some of the user setup options here and see what that looks like again. So kind of, again, chipping away at any concerns about what that's, if that's going to be detrimental to them or not. All right, so kind of a little different format slide here. What we have on the left is what I think of as like a countdown option. And during the implementation, the administrators can say that they're going to give a grace period for the users before they actually go ahead and set up their two-factor authentication. And we can kind of make that out here on the left. We can see that they have the option to skip for a number of days, and that's going to kind of decrement down to the point where they won't have any additional grace period left. And that's what we're going to see then on the right-hand side. We've got a mandatory prompt. They need to go ahead and start getting their two-factor authentication established. Certainly, the users don't have to wait for the expiration date to expire. They can use the next dialog on that and go ahead and proceed with that. But ultimately, at some point, they're going to move on to the verification option. So here we have on the left again, verification option. Again, there's some pull down options that you can do things other than the mobile app. That's what I've got shown in the dialog here. But again, the focus being on what Acropolis knows works best, I'm going to go ahead and focus on using that. So that's a mobile app. It's going to be installed on a smartphone. And then within that, there's two options even within that. The bottom option, I don't know, hopefully, well, it's a verification code. And that was kind of what I think of as more of a legacy type option. It's not a text code, but because it's come through the app. But then again, what happens is with the verification code is, at login, the user would receive a pop-up on the phone from the Microsoft Authenticator app, and it would generate that, I think, 6-digit code, and then they transpose that into the logon dialog on the computer. And that's kind of, that's kind of rudimentary and maybe unnecessary. So that's why we recognize that just receiving the notification for verification, the upper option on that is really the best, because what we'll see, and I've got a kind of a screen grab of that, is you'll just get a little dialog box on your phone, your mobile phone, that says, you want to approve or deny this, and certainly, if it's you logging in, you're going to approve it. After you click next on that, you'll get to the point where you'll see the mobile app dialog, and we're still on the computer. Spoiler alert, we're going to switch to some phone screen grabs here in a little bit. But so now we're still looking at the computer, and we've got a QR code. Now we need to go ahead and move on and think about what the end users need to do on their phone. So these are some screen grabs of an Android. The Microsoft Authenticator app is available certainly with Android as well as Apple. So ultimately, the dialog boxes are going to be pretty similar, but I'm just focusing here on some screen grabs from the Android environment. And so ultimately, what the user is going to need to do, they're going to go out to the Google Play Store. They're going to find the Microsoft Authenticator app and install that. They're going to open that. And then they're going to end up at the dialog box on the right where they've got the option to add their first account. So fairly straightforward aspect from that. So then what the users are going to have the option to do is go ahead and select the work or school account dialog in the middle of that leftmost screen grab. And the phone's going to go ahead and say, hey, is it okay for me to use pictures, take pictures or record video on that? The user's going to go ahead and allow that. And now on the right side, what we see is that's an example of the user's gonna take the phone, point it at the QR code, and it's gonna read that, and then that's really gonna establish the relationship between the phone, the mobile app, and the Office 365 account. All right, so now we're back at the computer. The user can go ahead and next through this dialog, and they're gonna go ahead and receive, again, a prompt that says, on the leftmost is something that the application is going to generate, that letting the user know that an approved sign-in request has been generated and sent. And again, the right-hand side is we're going to see the Microsoft Authenticator prompt pop up on the phone, and you get a simple, hey, do you want to approve or deny this? So, and that's subsequently what you're going to see, what the users are going to experience for moving forward. Anytime that two-factor authentication is required for the Office 365 services. And I'm thinking about those, I probably didn't mention it, but I'm thinking, that's apologies. I'm thinking, certainly online Office 365, email, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams even, and there's a number. Office 365 is really a pretty broad collection of application services and suites and things like that. And so the Office 365 two-factor can be applied to all of those. And again, a great improvement to improve security for all. And you may, not necessarily, maybe the thought comes to mind is like, I might have to do that every time. Well, if you're logged into if I imagine I'm logged into the web-based Office 365 and I'm kind of navigating around different applications. Now, once you're logged into the web portal, you'll be able to navigate in and out to each one without having this challenge each time. So again, with the thought being like, it needs to be helpful and secure, but it can't be so detrimental that users are just pitching a fit. So, all right. Let me talk a little bit about what happens. We talked about modern authentication and modern Office suites and things like that, but there is a potential that an organization has something that does not support modern authentication. And an example might be if for some reason you had an older version of an Office software suite, maybe Office 2010, and that this could be a unique scenario, but it's worth talking about what happens if that's the case. So Microsoft provides something that is described as the app password, and this is again a case where the user can go use their security verification page and go out and generate essentially a custom password for that application. Again, they'll navigate there, they'll generate it. It's going to create a very unique, I don't know if it's 10, 15 alphanumeric code. And then instead of their password for that application, when they go to log in, they'll use this app password. And what'll happen then is the Office 365 two-factor system will now know to associate that specific application with this custom password. And then, that's really, subsequent to that, the user won't have to use this app password additionally, but it's a mechanism where if you have something, a service, an application that's not two-factor authentication compliant, that there's a recourse to make that still more secure. So, and then another benefit to that is, you fast forward to a point where you no longer need that application, and you can go back into the security dialog and remove the association from your account. All right, next steps. How do we get this going? If you're not an Acropolis Technology Group client, give us a call. But seriously, if otherwise, reach out. If you're not leadership, let leadership know your thoughts on this, your desires and perspectives, certainly. But then ultimately, it needs to go to your IT support, and then there'll be their responsibility to go through and kind of what I talked about as far as the steps to assume. Do they have the requirements? Do they have the tool set, the skill, and the instructions ready to implement this and ready to support that ultimately? If you're if you're a Acropolis client, please contact your strategic advisor, and myself, Pat, Danielle, Nathan will be happy to talk with you more about, again, implementing this this feature within your Office 365 ecosystem. Again, talk about the requirements and the process, the steps, and things like that. So again, look forward to talking with people about that. But and again, if you're not an Acropolis client, certainly we'd be happy to speak with you about the prospect of helping you with this implementation, as well as other services and features that Acropolis can extend to your organization. So let's see what's next. Uh-oh, the wrong way. Oh, hey, well, here we go. Q&A. Let me see if I can figure out if there's any questions.
So Troy, our Q&A was disabled. I probably messed it up. I'm the one behind Troy. But anyway, we got one question emailed in, and if anybody else has any questions, then they can just email you at your email address there. But the one question we did get emailed in was that you brought up about the Pwned website, and it says they've heard about the dark web monitoring. Does Acropolis do that?
Yeah, thanks, Maria, and thanks for the question. So yes, Acropolis, realizes that there's threats come from many areas, and so yeah, that's definitely something that part of our services can be extended, is to regular monitoring of those dark websites to alert an organization if their email addresses or accounts are being registered on there and then up for sale and things like that. So again, understanding that security really is a fabric, and there's a lot of threads that go into that. That is something that we can help with, and again, look forward to talking with anybody about that for more information on what that service entails and some of the features that are involved. So thank you, Maria. So yeah, and again, as Maria pointed out, sorry about the Q&A. Please, my email address is here, and look forward to any questions that anybody wants to go ahead and forward on. Perhaps because of that, we may not have any right now. I certainly want, then what I thought about too is please take a look at the acropolistech.com/webinar series, and what you'll see there is, in a little while, you'll see this one for your review, as well as a number of the other ones that we've done previously, and are all great information. And then you'll also ultimately find information on upcoming webinars and schedules for those. And certainly welcome your suggestions as well. Go ahead and email me or Maria for anything you're like, hey, we know this is something Acropolis is comfortable with, or we'd like more information about it. Please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to follow up with thoughts on maybe some options or suggestions for webinar series. So Maria, you still with me?
I didn't leave you. I'm still here.
All right. I think maybe at that point, that's everything. And I think everyone, Nathan, for the Mr. Rogers reference, what a great guy. I wore a slightly red vest in his honor. And again, I thank everybody for the time. Take care. Stay safe. Thanks, everybody.